Hi, everybody. It's Friday. Welcome to Photofest 2021. This is our second day of online programming, and we also had our first photo walk this morning. Super excited to continue to have awesome programming and feature, obviously, our biggest sale of the year here at Glazers in Seattle. If you don't know about Glazers, we are a third-generation family-owned business. We're in our 86th year of business, founded in 1935. And it's pretty cool that this store has been around for as long as it has. And we have a really awesome staff who can answer all of your questions about any of the gear that you might possibly think of. As well, today and tomorrow, we will also have a variety of reps in the store from brands like SIGMA. So we're excited to have our friends from all of the awesome manufacturers in this weekend. Not everybody can be here. There's just going to be about 7 or 8 folks in store today and tomorrow. So if you're able to come in and say hi, we would love to see you. I will have some promotions and special deals that I will mention, but one thing I do want to mention real quick right now is that there are some category-wide promotions on the website right now. Things that we don't do very often, and so definitely take advantage of that while those offers are available. If you go to our website, you will see those promotions there. But let's talk about what we've got going on today. We do have several presentations today, and we also have some breakout rooms at lunch. But for now, I want to introduce Meg Loeks, who is a SIGMA Ambassador, and I believe you're also a Profoto Ambassador. But today we're going to talk about lenses. But Meg, can you just tell us a little bit about you, and then in a moment, we'll get started with the presentation.
Yeah, I'm so honored and excited to be here. My name is Meg Loeks, and I am a children's fine art and portrait photographer. I photograph my family, so all the images you're going to see today are of my family, of my children. I am a full-time photographer, and I mainly teach. So I have a couple of online workshops that I teach throughout the year. I also do in-person workshops. Obviously, that's kind of been on pause for the past year and a half, but things are starting to pick up again, which is great. I'm a SIGMA Ambassador, a Profoto Legend of Light, and a Click community mentor and instructor. And then I'm also a volunteer through the Gold Hope Project, which is a nonprofit organization that gives pediatric cancer families a free photo session. And so I've been a volunteer through that for the past couple of years now.
Okay, wow. That's really amazing. You know, your work is really, really beautiful, and we're excited to have you here today to talk about your approach with that. So with that said, for those of you tuning in, if you have questions during this session, we'll do the Q&A towards the end. We might ask a couple throughout, but most of it will be at the end of the session. But feel free to post questions throughout the session via the YouTube chat or Facebook comments, as I'll be in there monitoring those and answering some of those along the way. And we also have Erin from SIGMA who might be answering some of your questions along the way too. So don't be shy, get your questions posted. We might do a little bit of Q&A throughout, but most of the Q&A will happen towards the end of the segment. With all that said, I will put it back over to you, Meg, and let's get started with your presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm gonna go ahead and get started here. So what I'm going to be talking about today is timeless children's photography. My work really centers around timelessness, nostalgia, and so that's what you're going to see here. Again, these are all images of my family and of my children. I did take on clients years ago, but when my oldest child ended up getting really sick, he was diagnosed with leukemia. I stopped taking on clients and just focused on taking care of my family and then teaching as well. So all these images you're going to see are of my kids. I wanted to quick mention and show my gear. I shoot with 2 different camera bodies, Sony a7R4 mirrorless, and then the Canon 5D Mark IV. These are all the Sigma art lenses I use pretty heavily. I would say the only one I don't use as often would be the 135. And that's just simply because I love my 105 and I tend to gravitate towards that one more over my 135. But you can see They're all prime lenses. I really love my primes, especially because I'm shooting in low light pretty often. And so I like to have that wide aperture of like 1.4 available to me. I also mentioned earlier, I am a Pro Photo Legend of Light, so all the lighting gear I have is Pro Photo. I'm mainly a natural light photographer, but I do occasionally use my lights, especially in the winter when we have a lack of light. And I'll show a little bit of that soon. So what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about what makes an image timeless. We're going to discuss nostalgia, timeless clothing, inspiration and conceptual ideas, color theory, light, creative compositions, layering, and framing. So I wanted to get started on a little bit about my work. I'm often combining both fine art and lifestyle photography within my work. Fine art photography, the artist has a very specific and intentional vision. The goal is to express an idea, message, or emotion. And a lot of my conceptual ideas center around this. Lifestyle photography is about capturing the everyday in an artistic manner. And I really love to combine both of these genres together within my daily life. So what makes an image timeless? One of the things is nostalgia, the other timeless clothing and objects, also inspiration and conceptual ideas. I'm going to be covering that, and intentional color palettes. So with nostalgia, this is really the foundation of my work. When I talk about, like, if I had to mention one word that would define my work, it would really and truly be nostalgia. That's what gets me to pick up my camera every single day. All the things that I enjoyed as a child, I really love to do with my own children now. And so that is one of the biggest reasons for me picking up my camera every single day and photographing my children, enjoying some of the same things that I really loved. So with nostalgia, it's really about like reliving past childhood memories, things from your past that you really enjoyed doing. It's also back to the basics. It's really simple things. And you're going to see that a lot in my work. A lot of this is very classic stuff, very timeless stuff. You're not going to see a lot of like iPads or screen time in my photos. And that's simply just because our way of life. We really live in a remote area and we don't have a lot of screen time, at least, with our children. We're outside frequently. And so these are some of the things that I really enjoy capturing. It's, as I mentioned, a lot of outdoor fun. So we live on 40 acres. We have a little hobby farm and we spend a lot of time outside, especially in the summer because our summer is such a short season. So I'm capturing a lot of outdoor fun with my family. And it's a lot of home life. About 95% of my work is centered around my home, in and around my home. I really and truly wanted to live in an area where I felt like I never had to leave. Like I could, photograph these like pretty scenes and environments, and I had them right at my doorstep. And that's part of the reason why we are living remotely and for the privacy and all of that. There's some downsides to that, of course. And some things that I do miss about not living in town, but my work is really and truly just centered around the home. You don't see a lot of images of mine from like other locations and in places outside the home. And in fact, usually when we go on vacation, I tend not to pick up my camera very often. And a lot of that just really has to do with also I have 4 children. So we tend to be really busy and in a new area. I'm not really familiar with the new area. And so I often get kind of wary about picking up my camera too often. Whereas at home, I feel a little bit more safe to do that. Timeless clothing. So I wanted to quick talk about that because it is something that's really important to me within my work. You're going to see a lot of like neutrals, rich colors. I like to keep it simple. I love vintage clothing and heirlooms, things that have been passed down, things that have a story. I avoid labels. Now, here's the thing. As kids get older, they do develop a personal taste, which is wonderful. And I have 3 boys. My oldest is almost 10 years old. And some of them are really starting to develop their own personal style. And what I do is just pick my battles with them. If I really want to photograph them and I want them to wear something, I have to, of course, ask them and ask their permission and make sure that it's okay. And I just tell them, it's only going to be for a second, just for this photo. I'd really love for you to wear this, and this is why. And usually they're game with it. My daughter, she's pretty young yet, so it's easy to dress her in whatever I want. She thinks that, everything is pretty and wonderful. So it is easy to dress, I think, a younger kiddo versus like older ones. But if you're ever interested in like selling your work too as well, and doing like stock imagery, then with stock photos, you really can't have labels on clothing. So you have to avoid stuff like that with stock images. So with classic toys, this is something I'm always on the hunt for. And these are the places that I find them. I find them through Etsy. I find them through eBay. Facebook Marketplace is another great area to look for like old classic, like furniture, toys, all those kinds of things. And then I also do like local antique and secondhand shopping as well. But I would say my two favorite places would be Etsy and then Facebook Marketplace. Children's clothing. These are my favorite stores. So I've listed these here for you. Some of them are boutiques, and I would say on the higher end, I collaborate with some of these stores. So I work with them. They send me clothing. I photograph them. And then there's some options here that I would consider pretty inexpensive, like Target, H&M. H&M is one of my favorites because not only are they inexpensive, but they always have like such great timeless clothing options too. And I also find that their clothing is pretty long lasting compared to some of the other stores, which is really important for me because with 3 older boys who are playing outside a lot, the clothing takes a beating. So it's important for me to find clothing that is going to be long lasting. I also listed here stores that I love to shop at for women's clothing, specifically dresses. I love to buy dresses. I have a huge dress collection that I've collected over the years. And the wonderful thing about these stores is that these dresses are timeless. So they last forever. I still continue to wear dresses that I bought like 8 years ago from some of these places. Again, some listed are on the higher end, some are on the lower end, like Target. Target's a great place. I love shopping at Target. I always find some great things there. And so I would say between all of these, like my favorite places to find women's clothing and women's dresses are Free People and Christy Dawn. So where am I finding inspiration? And number one place of inspiration for me is our daily routine, our daily life. And I look to that constantly for motivation. They could be the most mundane thing. They could be, like here my daughter feeding our dog. They could be just simple chores, my kids brushing their teeth, getting dressed, all these things. And I try to put these events and moments in pretty lighting to document them. I keep a running list in my planner that I have of shot ideas. I have like a shot list, and that really keeps me motivated. So I'm not really just solely documenting milestones of my family. I'm documenting the little in-between moments that really make up our day and mean a lot to me. And if you're taking on clients, you can definitely do these sort of things with that family. You could do like a day in the life with your client and with your family. I always encourage people that are taking on clients before they photograph them, that they're going to do like a lifestyle session with them or a day in the life, to send out like a questionnaire before they go to their house, get to know that family a little bit more and their dynamic, things that they really love to do, because those are going to be the things that they're going to want you to photograph. Those are going to be the things that they're going to treasure. Mentioned this once before, but nostalgia is a big, big part of my work, and it's like the backbone of my photography. And this is a perfect example here. When I was growing up, one of like my core memories was, and it's a simple memory, but I used to love doing it, was sitting on my porch steps with my dad and chucking corn. And we would put the corn in like a brown paper bag. I remember it like very clearly. And so I loved doing this. And so I do this with my kids all the time. We'll all sit on these steps together and because they love to chop corn too. And so this is just one of those things I love to document because I love to do it when I was little too. So I also find inspiration through children's books and illustrations. And this is an example of that. This is from a children's illustration that I was really inspired by. And this tree is kind of like a little magical corner on our property. It has a tire swing. The boys climb it all the time. There's like a little ladder on it. There's also like bird feeders that my kids have made that are hanging on this. So there's just a bunch of things hanging on this tree. And I just love this little magical corner of our property. I also find inspiration through classic art. And this is an example of that, where not only did I find inspiration from the pose, but also the colors and the texture. And you could see how that's repeated here. And I just pulled some things that I had together at my house for this photo with my daughter. So another inspiration for me is Norman Rockwell. I am so inspired by him. He's one of the greatest storytellers of all time. I know you probably have all heard of him. And I started a personal project several years ago where I started replicating a lot of his paintings and illustrations. And I've done about 25 so far over the past few years. And it's a great way for me to stay inspired, especially when I'm feeling maybe a little bit burnt out, like I've captured everything in my daily life and I'm running out of ideas. I'll look to art for inspiration. And Norman Rockwell is definitely a big inspiration for me. This was inspired by a painting he had that was titled Home from Camp. And it's actually very different from the painting. I originally started out like replicating the painting almost exactly like the original. And then I kind of started changing up. This is actually my second attempt shooting this. And it's quite different from the original in location, colors, lighting, all of it. But I think that's like the beautiful thing about it is that we can draw inspiration from art, but we can really change some things up to make it our own. This is one of my favorites that I just recently did. And this was inspired by George Hughes, who was actually a friend of Norman Rockwell's. And this was a painting inspired by a painting called More Clothes to Clean. And it was done in 1948, and it was a Saturday Evening Post cover. And I loved it. I love my laundry line that we have behind our house. And so it was a little tricky for me with this because I had to use the right lens. And I ended up using my Sigma Art 50 for this. And I had to have the right settings because I wanted myself to be out of focus here. And I wanted to make sure that it looked intentional, like that I was supposed to be out of focus. But I didn't want to be too heavily blurred either so that you couldn't really see me. And the focus was clearly on my daughter here. And she's kind of covered in dirt, which was the whole idea behind it anyway. And so I had to get some things right. And this was, I think, my second or third attempt shooting this too. So I like these kind of challenges I get from drawing inspiration from art as well. So conceptual idea process. This is one of my favorite things to do within my own work. It can be a lot of work, so I don't do it often. And I find that if I do too many conceptual ideas, I can get kind of burnt out. But I'm going to show a little bit of my process and how I go about doing these. And what I do is I start out by coming up with the idea and writing it down. With my conceptual ideas, a lot of times they're formed because I'm working with like a toy store or a clothing store. And so I need to come up with an idea. A lot of times like a toy store will send me some toys. And then I go through the box and then I start to try to come up with ideas on how I can work with the toy and photograph it. And I'll also find that what I'll do is when I think of my idea or come up with my idea, I'll draw it out as well so that I can visualize what I want it to look like. So I might draw out a rough sketch of how I want my frame composed and all of that. This is an example of actually a toy store that sent me like this little nightlight that I really loved. And I kind of came up with this idea during the winter. Another example. So after I've come up with the idea, I've kind of planned it out a little bit, drawn out the idea, then I need to pick a location and I need to style. So I'll pick a location within my own home. And this was in my dining room, and I shot this in my dining room just because of the wall color. And the styling, I picked a color scheme, and I went with that color scheme and laid everything out in advance and kind of staged this whole thing for the shot. And this was for another toy store, and they have these awesome little wooden kitchens that I needed to photograph. So before I start shooting, I always do a test shot to check my lighting and my composition. Since my daughter tends to be like my muse right now and is the one child that I tend to photograph the most, because my boys are starting to get a little bit older, and they weren't around a lot when they were in school, but now they're home for summer break, which is great. So anyway, I don't have a lot of time with a toddler once I get her in the frame. Like I have to be very, very quick. I have like 1 or 2 minutes before she's done. She's moving on to something else. So I need to be ready to go. So I always get my test shot in first, check my lighting, my exposure, make sure that my exposure is set as well before I bring her into the frame. Well, another thing I do a lot is I do composites. And for me, and I think everybody really in general, I can't recommend tripod enough for something like this. It will make your life 20 times easier to have your camera on a tripod when you're shooting a composite. Most of my composites, I know they're going to be a composite before I start shooting. So I've always had my camera on a tripod so that I can easily merge these images together. So you're going to see here my process. This was the first shot, my straight out of camera shot. This is unedited. And then this is another image merged with it, another one here. And then I ended up having this final one, as you can see. So I just merged all of these images together, and it was really easy to do within Photoshop just because I had my camera on my tripod. So I wanted to talk about color theory and intentional color palettes because this is huge within my work. I love color. I love the story that color can tell through images. So you're not going to see any black and white, and it's not because I have anything against black and white. It's just that I'm really drawn to color within my own work. So purposeful use of color has the ability to enhance storytelling. It can help guide the viewer through your frame. It can add symbolism and meaning by use of color theory. Essentially, picking a color palette prior to shooting, much like painters do before painting on a canvas, can give your image a painterly atmosphere. So that's what I'm doing here. A lot of times I'm trying to pick my color palette, and I have an intentional color palette before I start shooting. Some of the things that color can do is it can guide the viewer through your frame. It can add balance to your image. It can add symbolism and also enhance emotion. This is a perfect example, this image here, of where color added balance and helped guide the viewer through my frame. You could see there are intentional splashes of green here throughout the frame. And this was all like laid out in advance before I brought my daughter into the frame for her bath. Another example of intentional color palettes. So this was a conceptual idea, and it was the first time I was painting her nails. And so all of the colors that you see here, I decided to go with complementary colors with the blue and orange. They were all laid out in advance before shooting this. Also, repetition of color that can be really visually pleasing. You can see, of course, here's complementary colors with the red and the green. Then we've got these wonderful pops of red repeated throughout my frame. We've got my son on the left side here, and he was picking some berries or something. And then I've got my other 2 boys that ended up photobombing this. They were running on a trail in the woods, and you could just barely make out the balloons that they were holding as well. Color is also wonderful because it can add like a color pop to your subject, which can, of course, isolate them, draw the viewer right to them. And so I know we're going to be in an environment where maybe there's like, this is a perfect example where I knew we were going to have a lot of green. Then I dressed my daughter in like a red color because I wanted her to really pop against the environment. Complementary colors. This is something that I love to play with quite often. These are colors that are opposite of each other in the color wheel. So red and green would be an example, purple and yellow. And this is like a blue and orange kind of color. It's almost kind of like gold, but he really, really pops against that moody sky. You can see here are some other examples of color play as well, complementary colors. Analogous colors. I feel like this isn't talked about as much, and I love analogous colors. They are colors that are right next to each other in the color wheel, and they're usually 3 or more. And so this one obviously would be like yellow, green, and blue that I'm kind of playing with here. Another example of analogous colors that are next to each other in the color wheel. You can see like the splashes of color throughout my frame in this shot. Same thing here with analogous colors. They're very visually pleasing. So onto light. I wanted to talk about how utilizing light can help guide the viewer through your frame, draw attention to certain details, and enhance your subject's story. So one of the things I like to do is I like to wait for the good light. It can be a little challenging in the summer, and the days are really long. And so golden hour happens very early in the morning and happens very late in the day, in the evening. It's much easier for me to make golden hour in the morning since my children are early risers than it is in the evening. So it really just depends on your family or your client's family and what's easiest for them. One of the things I do often is I study the light in and around my home throughout the day because it's going to change. It's changing hour by hour. It's changing by season as well. And there's some rooms that I prefer to shoot in the morning versus the evening and all of that. It just depends on a lot of variables, the weather, where the windows are, all of that stuff. When I notice good lighting, I write down the times that I notice when it's really pretty, and I try to come back to it at a time when I know that I can shoot. I also center my conceptual ideas around this good light as well. So indoors, I love to manipulate the light, and I love shooting indoors, especially in the winter. I'm shooting indoors about like 90% of the time. We have really harsh winters where we live. And I think it's super important, first of all, to know before you start shooting whether the environment is going to be important to your subject's story or not. If the environment is really important to your subject, then you're going to want a lot of light to flood into the room as much as possible to really highlight all of those important things within the room that add to your subject's story. If the environment is not important to your subject, then there are things you can do to hide and mask that environment if you want to isolate your subject. And one of those things is just by creating directional light through the use of curtains. I do this all the time. So we have curtains on every single one of our windows. And when I was photographing clients, I would bring curtains with me with like clamps because sometimes they wouldn't have curtains. And so I would use those to sometimes like block out some light if I needed to, because sometimes rooms have more than one window. And I needed to manipulate that light. So I'm often, closing the curtains a little bit, kind of creating a pocket of light for dramatic lighting. Also, of course, if you bring your subject towards the window, close to the window or close to the light source, you're going to have a dramatic light fall off, which means that your background's probably going to be really dark. The closer they are to the window and the light source, the darker your background's going to be, the more contrast you're going to have, the stronger the highlights, the deeper the shadows and all of that. So I really often have my children close to the window in my house when I'm shooting. I'm also working in low light pretty often within my home. We have dark color paint. We don't have a ton of windows, and our windows aren't that big. So I'm often trying to get them close to the window in general anyways to keep my ISO down. I also, as I mentioned, use created light. And my overall goal with created light is to not tell that I'm using created light, to not be able to tell that this is flash. Mainly off-camera flash is what I use. My favorite light is my Profoto A10, and this is what I'm using here. And it's just my A10 on my light stand with an umbrella, and I'm bouncing that A10 into the umbrella and then onto my daughter here. And one of the reasons I love having my lights is it just gives me a lot of flexibility. I'm able to utilize every space of my home when I'm shooting. And that goes for clients too. I love to be able to shoot in every single space. And I made it a goal last year to do just that, to shoot in the stairway, to shoot in the laundry room, to shoot in every single bathroom, bedroom. And I did that kind of as like a personal project. And I was able to use my lights if I needed to. In some spaces, it was just wonderful to be able to do that. I love that I can shoot at any time of day or night. And this was taken at night. It was pitch black out, and I just set up my light and light stand to be able to capture this. And I use modifiers quite heavily to help soften the light and make it look natural. Here's a BTS. This is my typical setup. My light is on a Manfrotto light stand with an umbrella. I love the deep white umbrellas. This is the large size from Profoto. So this is what I have, and this is my typical setup. And I just bounce it off the umbrella to soften the lighting here. And you can see it's very natural. You would never be able to tell that this was flash. It's just being filtered through the window and the curtain here onto my daughter. I also mix lighting. And here I'm using a little bit of both natural and created light to create this scene. Natural light is coming from the window and falling on them here very softly. There's a north-facing window, but then I had my Profoto B10 help light this puppet scene, and it has a temperature slider on it, so I could warm the lighting up, which is why this light is really warm, and we have this warm, beautiful glow on them. One of the things I run into often, or people ask me, is like, how do you keep children engaged in good lighting? I think this is such a good thing to cover because it can be tricky and it depends on the child's age. I do think that toddlers are one of the toughest ages to photograph. They're very authentic and they're not very camera aware. That's the beautiful thing about that age. But the tricky part is keeping them engaged. They tend to have a very short attention span, of course. So one of the things I like to do is I just set up an activity, give them something to do. And this really goes for any age group. Give them something to do to keep them in some pretty lighting for a little bit longer. Center the activity around food. And again, this goes for any age group. I do this a lot with my kids, especially when I want all four of them in the frame together. I might give them some food. It makes them happy. I get a lot of awesome expressions. And again, keep them engaged longer. I Spy, I feel like this is the oldest trick in the playbook, but just trying to get her to maybe look at something in the sunflower here. Like, do you see the bug or do you see the bumblebee? Just getting her to look briefly there, especially because I wanted her to look up so that there would be more light falling on her face. Get in the frame, whether it's a self-portrait or, if you're photographing your clients, maybe you need the child that you're photographing to relax or get them to just relax in general. Getting a parent in the frame with them is really going to help them do that. Shooting in live view and talking to your subject. This is my favorite way to photograph my children, especially when I need a direct gaze portrait like this. So I want my daughter to look right at the camera, right at me. And in order to get an authentic expression and avoid the deadpan stare, I put my camera in live view, pull the camera away from my face so that she can see me, and I talk to her and I have a conversation with her. Pair the child up with a pet. We have a lot of pets. They're very important to our family. And that's something, if you're photographing a client, you might want to ask them about that. If they have pets, we have a lot of them. And so this is a great way to keep my children engaged longer in front of the camera. I always love expressions I sometimes get to when I'm pairing my kids up with our pets. Creative compositions. How can I shoot this differently? So one of the things I strive for is I like to go into a session, whether it's with my children or when it was with a client, and I like to aim to get the safe shot first. And then I try to get creative after that. I like to try to unglue my feet, move around, change perspectives, change lenses. So you could see here, this was more of my safe shot. This is the one I had planned on getting. And this was taken with my Sigma R 85 millimeter. I'm getting really beautiful compression here, helping to isolate him. It's dreamy, but I really wanted to give the environment here justice. And I did that by putting on my Sigma Art 24. This is going to capture just like the vast field here. I got up really high. I got up on a step ladder, and then I held my camera up above my head to capture as much of the landscape as I possibly could. Made my children look really small and had them like run through the field here, which they love to do. So it was one of those shots I was really happy to get, and it was very different from my first shot. This is another example. So this is just right out in our meadow, and of my daughter. This would be my safe shot that I intended to get at first. And this is right next to where she was. And I noticed we had like these like path of daisies that grew right in front of like where we have this swing and hammock. And I got really, really low to capture all of like the daisy bokeh in the foreground, and then my daughter in more of like the background here, as you can see. So this was an experimental shot, and this ended up being my favorite of the two. I love to capture this perspective, bird's eye view, especially when I have a cluttered room. So if I want to simplify my frame and simplify my environment, I'm going to shoot from above. And I also think it's kind of a unique perspective too as well. I shoot at eye level often with my children. This is a self-portrait with my daughter and I just recently took this. And I like to have my camera like low at their level to kind of see the world from their level. Details are another important thing to remember to capture. This is something I will admit, I'm not very good at remembering to do. I tend to love to capture environmental portraits. So I am often backed way up from my kids to capture a lot of the environment around them, make them look small. I also kind of like to be a fly on the wall when I'm photographing them. I kind of like I give them gentle guidance, but then like to let them do their own thing. So I don't often get in close to capture details like this. So it is something that I constantly have to remind myself to do. I love to shoot vertical, and shooting vertical, one of the things that's wonderful about this perspective is the great sense of scale you can get from it. I especially love to shoot vertical when I have a lot of vertical lines like trees in the woods and pathways. This could be a great perspective for that. And so you can see here, this is an example. Reflections are something that I'm always on the lookout for, whether it's a reflection off of a lake or off of like a puddle or off of a window or a mirror, of course. I'm constantly looking for reflections to add another like a visual element to my images. I love to shoot from the outside in. I think this is a unique perspective too that we don't often see. So I may be inside shooting along a window, photographing my kids along a window. But then to kind of change things up, get a unique perspective, I might go outside, shoot through the window at them. And this ended up being one of my favorite shots with my son. It was the first snowfall that we had of winter. And he pressed his face right up against the window. It was absolutely adorable. The tip I want to give you guys on this, because I get this question a lot, is it's really helpful if you have a dark background behind you. So here, there's a tree line behind me. And that's what all like this darkness is around my son, is that reflection of the dark tree line. So it's really making him pop because I have that dark tree line behind me. So that's one of the things I wanted to recommend on this is trying to find something like dark that you could maybe put behind you to kind of block out some like bright reflections from the sky and stuff so that your subject really, really pops. I love to create balance with color, and this is a perfect example of that with splashes of green throughout my frame here that I did to create balance. So color can be a wonderful compositional element as well. Negative space, helping to isolate my subject, draw the viewer into them as well here. It really makes my son look small too. I think having all this like wonderful, beautiful negative space surrounding him. And the last kind of thing I wanted to cover before we go into questions is layering and framing. I do this often. I'm constantly looking for things in my environment to add layers and depth to my images. So layering is carefully composing your frame through elements in the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. And then, of course, with framing, it helps to isolate your subject. And all of these things really just enhance depth overall within your images. This is an example of layering and framing here with my children. This is a conceptual idea that I had planned. And my two older boys here in the foreground. Obviously, my focus fell on my youngest son here, who's framed by my older two. And then I've got another layer here, which is the photograph here in the background. And it's a photograph called Grace. And I intentionally put that there. And so you can see all like the repetition I have going on here too, as well with the praying. So this was definitely a conceptual idea, but there's lots of layers here that give this image depth. This is another example of framing, and this is just a crib shot of my daughter. I took a crib shot of my daughter every single month to document her growth. I did this with my son as well. I've taken these all, every single one of my children, and I usually shoot these with my 24mm so that I can easily capture all of the crib here. My 24 is definitely my favorite lens to use for above shots because I'm able to capture a lot of the environment in a tight space. I usually get on like a step stool and I have my camera in live view. I just hold my camera out in front of me and shoot kind of blindly to shoot these. With my Sony, you could pop out the screen, which is great. So I could kind of see what my frame looks like. But with my Canon, I can't pop out my screen. But I love to capture as much of the crib as possible because these bars just frame her so beautifully. So this is another example of framing. And this was taken in my daughter's bedroom, and it was just of her the curtains that she had in her room. And so I have several shots with these curtains and her just playing with these curtains in her bedroom. And I have some where she's standing just right alongside the window. And then I unglued my feet and changed lenses and shot some from above. And the wonderful thing about having her like look up like I do here is I'm allowing for a lot of light onto her face and into her eyes, as you can see. So that's another thing I wanted to just briefly mention was if I notice that there's like a lack of light on my subject, especially indoors, one of the things I try to do is just stand a little bit higher than my children to allow for more light to fall on their faces and into their eyes. I'm constantly looking to make sure that I've got catch lights in their eyes. Super important when I have a direct gaze portrait. I'm making sure, that the highlights look good. I'm looking at where the shadows are falling, whether they're really strong or not. And, whether I've got to try to soften them a little bit more and whatnot. So I am paying attention to that. But I love to try to frame my children as much as possible to help isolate them and make them pop. So we have about 15 minutes now. So I know that we wanted to save a little bit of time here at the end of the presentation to open it up for questions.
Yeah, we have a few. We have just a few so far. So, but I don't know how much more you have in your presentation. So was that the end?
No. That was the end, yeah.
The way you said it, I thought you had more. That's all. And awesome. Okay, well, we have some questions. Are you ready?
I am ready, yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so first of all, I would love to say that your family is beautiful and your house is beautiful, and we all want to move into your house, so I'm just going to put that. I was like, because I have a space in my home that I also use for sessions, but I'm like, I like her colors a lot. So anyhow, so thanks for sharing all of that with us. So we have a few different questions, and I think you kind of answered this one a little bit, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just to kind of dive into it a little bit. Luke, who is a regular here at Glazers, do you primarily use a tripod with these shoots? And are you using a self-timer, cable release, or an app to trigger the photo when you're in the photo?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do use a tripod whenever I am doing a composite. And like I said, I usually know before I start shooting whether I'm going to be doing a composite or not. Like a lot of my animal shots are often composites as well, because it can be really tricky to get both the animal and my kiddo, to do what I'm hoping they will do in the shot.
Right.
So I usually have my camera on a tripod for that. But self-portraits, yes, always on a tripod. And I do two different ways with those. With my daughter, I use interval timer on my camera when I'm shooting a self-portrait with my daughter. With my children that are older, my three boys that are a little bit older, I love to use the Canon Connect app for that. And the reason there's a daughter, she's very hands-on. I don't like to have a remote in my hands. I usually have to engage with her quite heavily, hold her. So interval timer works great. With my boys, they take gentle direction and posing so well. So typically I get, us together in the shot, and then I use my Canon Connect app to focus on us, and I have it on like the self timer for 10 seconds, so I can easily quick hide my phone, and then it'll take the shot.
Right. Okay. Awesome. I do that setup sometimes for myself. Awesome. Okay. So this is this is more of a time management question, but totally valid. How do you find the time to organize the setups between cooking, feeding, sleep, dressing, fixing hair, all of those things? So any tips for kind of like juggling all the aspects, because you have 4 young kids. Some of them, I guess, are getting a little bit older, so maybe they're able to help with some of that, or they're more independent. But what maybe do you have like 1 or 2 tips to share with those tuning in on how to manage and juggle?
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, that is the biggest struggle and continues to be. I think that'll be something that I'm always going to struggle with. But there's some things I've learned over the years that have really helped with it, in creating just balance in my life, in my daily life. And one of those things, I do like to tell people this, because I feel like they think that my children are home all the time, and like that it's just crazy how I can do all this with them being home. They're not actually. So my children, my boys go to school, but my daughter does go to daycare. So I do have time at home during the day to get work done. First of all, one of the things I swear by, and I know this is like such a simple thing, is my planner. I have a planner, and I write my schedule for the week in my planner, and that includes everything down to like shooting. And I will carve out like 10 to 15 minutes a day to shoot, no matter what, because it's really important for me to continue to shoot every day. Even if I've got deadlines I haven't quite met yet, I still need to be able to get out and shoot for 10 to 15 minutes to push myself. It's also therapeutic for me. So it's like my therapy,
Right.
Kind of like a little bit of a mental break. So I schedule that in every single day. I try to edit 1 image a day, no more than usually. So that was another question I often get, is just like, what do you do with all these photos that you take? I'll take an entire session, and I'll only pick like 1 or 2 photos out of that entire session that I love, and I'll just edit those, and then I'll archive the rest.
Right.
I won't edit those and won't worry about them. I just pick the best of the best, or try to. But planning out my schedule, it's really important, really key. I try to, edit and cull first thing in the morning before I have to drive kids around, all of that stuff. But I think like intentionally scheduling these things are really important. On the weekends, I tend to unplug a little bit. That's when I kind of really try to stop work. I think it's really hard when you're running your own business to do that. Like I feel like since I work from home and I'm running my own business, I feel like I'm constantly working. And I try to on Saturday and Sunday, like be completely unplugged and be with my children, especially because my husband, he's away right now. So he's gone for 2 weeks. He's in the military. And so he's gone frequently, and I'm feeling the weight of that. Right. With running my own business, having 4 kids, and it also being summer, we have lots of animals. We have way too many gardens. I always do this every year where I'm like, oh, we need a pumpkin patch, and we need an apple orchard, and we need this, and we need that. And so then I'm like, now I'm feeling that.
Right.
But I do love it. I do love to keep busy. But it can be a lot. It really can.
Yeah, I'd agree. I always feel a little bit guilty if like I'm, watching something on Netflix. I'm like, I could be working on my blog, or I could be editing this, or I could be planning social posts of the week or whatever. So it's real easy to kind of feel like that. But then you do have to give yourself time to unplug and connect with your family and friends and yourself. So let's talk.
I think.
Go ahead.
I think that time blocking is huge too. Like I will say, like, time blocking, especially when it comes to social media, is like a big part of it. I'll hop on, because with social media, I do feel like I need to be on there. It's part of my business, because I do sell workshops and stuff. So I have to be on social media, but I'll time block. So I'll hop on and be like, okay, I'm going to designate 15 minutes of engaging, like looking at other people's other artists' photos, engaging with them, communicating with other people. And then I hop off for like 2 hours, and I stay off for 2 hours. So doing that also helps. So I think, planning out your day, even like the little things. I'm such a planner. I need to write things out. I find satisfaction when I get something done to cross it off. I know that sounds silly, but I just love doing that. And so things like that, little things like that, help me stay organized.
Oh, I've totally added things to my to-do list after I've done them, just so I can feel like, well, this was the thing I got done.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that does that.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about light. So you talked about blending available light. You showed us your setup with the A10 or an A1X maybe, outside the window with an umbrella. So how much does that play into your work? How much does that ease your post-production time? And then just to kind of tack on to the post-production, how much time do you spend? You talked about editing a little bit. How much time do you spend in editing, and what tools you're using? Are you Adobe, Capture One, that kind of thing?
Okay, yeah. So I like to have a solid straight out of camera shot to begin with. So it's very important for me to have the lighting be just how I want it to be before I start shooting. Same with color. So I'm using Kelvin to set my white balance. I tend to maybe shoot a little bit on the warm side, but I find that my coloring is better when I do that, versus if my white balance is way too cool and then I have to try to warm it up in post, it can be kind of a nightmare. So I like to really and truly have a solid straight out of camera shot. And then in post, sometimes I'll underexpose my image. I do kind of like moody lighting, but I tend to start out with a straight out of camera shot. And perfect my lighting as much as possible. It's easier to do that inside versus outside. Obviously outside, you've got a lot of light available, but sometimes that can be tricky because there's just so much light, and you can't really manipulate that as easily. But I often try to like look for like a tree line or something where maybe I can block some lighting out from one direction, and then I'm kind of creating directional light. Maybe have like open field to the right of me and then a tree line to the left of me. So I have like this nice directional light that I might be looking for. But in post-processing, I use Adobe Creative Cloud, and I use both Lightroom and Photoshop. I try to do as much editing as possible in Lightroom. I love Lightroom. It's easy to use. So I try to do as much as I can there. I do have to use Photoshop when I'm doing like composites, and I would say I probably do 1 to 2 composites a week. So they do happen pretty frequently. Also, I do heavier like color manipulation in Photoshop. I do like the brushes in Photoshop more too as well than in Lightroom. I think they're a little bit easier to use.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would say average image for me would be probably 15 minutes of editing. Now, like an image that is more of like a composite or might be like heavier editing could take an hour easily.
Okay.
So it just depends on what I need to do. So that's why I'm only editing 1 image a day usually, because sometimes if it's like an hour, that's enough for me.
Well, and you talked about like going through everything from a session and really picking the best photo or the best couple and working on those. There's no need to edit the ones that you're not going to publish, right?
Right.
And that's, yeah, that's also my approach. So I'll ask this, it's kind of related. When you, I didn't ask this question. If you're willing to share, how long have you been doing photography? If you're willing to share that answer.
Yeah, I forget to mention that, and I don't know why I always do that. I would say, well, I actually started photography when I was really young. So I was in high school. I started with film, and we had this amazing dark room at our school. So I was developing my own prints. I used to work for the yearbook at that time for a couple of years. So that's really and truly when I started. And I got a small art scholarship when I went to college, and just really didn't end up pursuing photography at that time. I picked it back up when I started having kids. So I've been doing photography, I would say, for about 8 years. I've been in business for about 7.
Okay.
But I switched to digital when I started having children. So I was originally with film first. So, and I do miss it a little bit. I really loved developing my own prints. I think that was my favorite part of the process when I was younger. And I learned a lot doing that too. And so I really enjoyed that. And that might be something that eventually I pick back up again when my children are older.
Right. Well, and it's easier to get back into now because I know for me, I took a break from film, but I use it. I've been using it more and more. And it is a lot of fun. It does force you to slow down, which is really nice. Were there any resources that helped you as you were learning, like the digital darkroom or for Adobe and Lightroom? Or was it just kind of diving in and just really learning the tools yourself?
I am, I would say, more self-taught than anything, but I did started taking classes through Click Community.
Okay.
And it was formerly known as Click and Moms, but now it's Click Community. And they have Click Photo School, where they offer just tons and tons of classes. And I started out with the basics with them, just, making sure I understood manual mode, light, setting light. And then I took like a Lightroom class because I knew how to use Photoshop. I learned that at quite a young age, but I didn't know how to use Lightroom. So I took a class on that. And so that's where it really started. And now I teach for them. So it kind of came full circle, which is cool. But I still take classes through Click Photo School. They're probably my greatest resource.
Well, and I'll just put a plug in for Glazers. We obviously offer a lot of programming throughout the year. For those of you who are interested in getting education, there's a ton of ways you can do that. And here at Glazers, we also offer a ton of programming. Let's ask a couple of Sigma lens questions, and then we're going to wrap this up. So you talked about the 24. I know that you use that a lot for certain things. If you were to just pick up one lens right now, what would your go-to lens be? I know that's a hard question.
Such a tough question.
That's like a mean question almost.
It's hard because I shoot with prime lenses. So, it's like I usually always have like 2 with me. I would say the 35.
Okay, top 2.
Sigma Art 30. Okay, top 2. I can do that. So Sigma Art 35 millimeter would be my number 1 choice because it's the most versatile prime lens that I have. I can use that indoors in tight spaces, in like busy locations as well. It's just a great lens. Works awesome in low light too, and is like tack sharp in low lighting especially. And then my 105, my Sigma Art 105 is my favorite portrait lens. I love that lens. It's so dreamy. There's amazing compression with that. Beautiful, beautiful bokeh. It's called the bokeh master for a reason. So almost 90% of my shots outside are with that lens. It's big, but oh my gosh, it's so dreamy. And so I would say the Sigma Art 35 and the Sigma Art 105 are my favorites.
Okay, awesome. But like you said, you're using primes, so you kind of have a few others that you go to for certain things, like the photos of the kiddos in the crib, because you can get more information with the 24. So awesome. Well, I will take a moment to thank you and to Sigma, Erin, and all of that for helping to facilitate this presentation. It's really lovely to hear the story and receive all the tips about the work and how you create it. Before we sign off, I would like to just remind folks that Photofest is our biggest sale of the year. So if you're in the market for a new Sigma lens, maybe, there's a ton of rebates going on right now for grads and dads because Father's Day is just around the corner. And there's a super special secret promotion that I can't mention on air, but can tell you, you can call the store or come in to take advantage of that offer on select Sigma lenses. And then in general, there's a bunch of ways to save. There are a lot of in-store category-wide discounts, as well as promotions on and instant rebates on a variety of cameras and, of course, lenses. We have more programming today. We have a couple of breakout rooms that start at noon. So if you want to participate in that, please go register. We're going to be sending the email out with that link in about 5 minutes. So be sure to get registered so you can get that link. And outside of that, more programming this afternoon and tomorrow and Sunday. So Meg, thank you so much. Sigma, thank you so much for making this happen.
Thank you.
It's been really great and such a joy to see your work. And everyone who tuned in and joined us, thank you for being here. We'll let everybody go for now. We'll see you back online in a few hours. Meg, thanks again.
Thank you.